Hi, my name is Dr. Dyann Ross. I'm a love theorist. Today I'm wanting to talk to you about the big kahuna idea of broken-heartedness. It's big for me because after many years as a social worker, I've come to this idea as really important for social workers. And I think it's important for so many different reasons, but the big reason is to really come to a deep, informed and loving sense of what it can mean for people who we often work with as social workers, who experience all sorts of injustices and harm and trauma and loss. What does it really mean? What can it look like for them? And as part of not actually wanting to diagnose people, far from it actually, but to actually have a way of thinking about who we may be engaging with and the depths and pain they may be experiencing, that we can become less attuned to because we have so many responsibilities when we're interacting with people as to what we need to be doing in terms of helping from the point of view of whoever we're working for, the agency we're working for. So, like, for example, when we look at the Code of Ethics for Social Work, it is very important to recognise the purpose of social work and our values as social workers. And the purpose is to contribute to people's well-being and social justice concerns and to uphold human rights. Clearly, that's very important. But what those important concepts don't tell us is what's happening for the other person that we are trying to connect with and make some contribution towards. What might their experience be about? And I get that it could be really unhelpful to think that any one word can explain or give clues to what might be happening for a person. But after many, many years of social work where I've been with people in all sorts of situations of distress and loss, one of the words that kept coming up from the people I was working with was how brokenhearted they felt. And it took me a long time to really hear that word in a way that I'm trying to understand and hear it now. People will readily say, I don't know where to start, I'm broken-heartedness, I just feel overwhelmed with life and the pain that I'm feeling. This was the most common kind of statement people would make to me, often as we are beginning to work together. So what I'm doing is actually interpreting from the accounts and experiences that people have conveyed to me to come to this idea of brokenheartedness and to regard it as really an important tool from a social worker's point of view in working to understand what might be happening for the other person. Now, again, it's not a diagnosis, but what I'm wanting to do in this short video is to give you a sense of what the concept of brokenheartedness can mean and how it can help in practice. Okay, so uh, again, please don't see it as, oh, I need to go and diagnose if people have got a broken heart. That's not the point of this video. The point of the video is to help us as social workers be more attuned or as tuned as possible to the depths of despair and pain and harm and loss that can be happening for someone, and to not lose sight of how the person understands their experience. And they may not use the concept of brokenheartedness, and it's not something you would impose on someone, but it's something for you to think about. What's happening with this person? What's happening with their heart? How are they feeling? Okay, so some of you may be aware of the concept of broken-hearted syndrome. This is just an introductory comment for the moment before we delve into what I understand broken-heartedness to mean. So broken-heartedness is actually recognised in the medical profession. There's a diagnosis called broken-hearted syndrome, and sometimes the more professional, the more medical, not necessarily more professional, the more medical term is stress-induced cardiomyopathy. And I find that fascinating that there is a medical term that speaks to the physical impact of having a broken heart. And of course, most of us would know it as someone having a heart attack, or having severe heart conditions at a physical level. So, for my purposes, for our purposes as social workers, we're really as well incredibly interested in the social phenomenon that causes brokenheartedness, which is less the scope of practice for medical practitioners. So I'm really wanting to add a different, more broader definition without losing sight of the physical dimensions of what might be happening for someone experiencing deep trauma and loss and harm. So what we're talking about here is an emotional, social way of understanding brokenheartedness as a way of attuning ourselves to people's experiences. And that matters to social workers because we are needing to build a meaningful relationship with the people we're working with as part of how we might go about helping them. And to deeply listen to a person's experience is always, always important. And to show that we're listening and understand it and can hold with them in that pain and experience in all its dimensions is central to social work. Okay. So once I cottoned on to the way brokenhearted and feeling brokenhearted was a really abiding theme in how people who are clients of social work practice, how they often talked about their situation, I set to really trying to think through how that concept of brokenheartedness could be made robust as a way of understanding people's experiences. And I came to the idea with a strong influence from Bell Hooks, who is an internationally renowned theorist and writer on the issue of racism and all the harm that can come from that, and her idea of love. So what I've come to see brokenheartedness as is the lack of or the loss of love in a person's life, or the withholding of love that might be expected and proper to give to a person. That and this concept of lovelessness to me is at the base of brokenheartedness and the experiences of brokenheartedness. And this already is an important way of starting to think about what is the nature of the harm and loss that the person might be experiencing. So I go a step further and again influenced by people like Bell Hooks and other anti-oppressive writers and activists, and think about a type of brokenheartedness that involves some form of violence against a person or their loved ones, or having witnessed violence against other people that's causing a person to feel brokenheartedness, and interrelated with that, some type of injustice where someone or someone they love or someone they've become aware of through the social and other media has experienced a grave injustice to them. So this is not necessarily how everybody would think about brokenheartedness, but to me it's an extreme form of brokenheartedness where a real harm is done through the withholding of love due to the use of violence against a person or the unfair treatment of a person. And again, it can be someone the person loves or other people they become aware of where there's an injustice or violence done to them. So this is a very particular understanding of brokenheartedness. And it's not to foreclose other ways of understanding it, but it really brings us to an anti-oppressive social justice way of thinking about the causes of brokenheartedness, which is right in the pocket of what social work is about. So, in a nutshell, if I had to define what brokenheartedness is, it is the diversity and depth of experiences that are based on any form of lack of love, loss of love, or withholding of love, where violence is involved or an injustice of some type is happening for the person. So with that definition, it sits right in the middle of the concerns for social workers because most of the people we work with are experiencing some level of social harm. And I'm going to give some examples of what the social issues are that typically social workers are involved with. And then I'm going to locate the personal experience that can often go with that for people who may be experiencing those social, what we would call social issues, um, and see whether this is helpful for you. So the thing I'm going to do now is not necessarily always that helpful because when you start to create a list, like a list of social justice issues, list of reasons or sources of brokenheartedness, you might first of all get overwhelmed with the list, but you might think, oh, but you didn't put this on the list. So this is an indication of the kinds of things that can cause brokenheartedness. And the other complexity is also that often people experience a mix of things and different intensities of losses in terms of social issues. So some of the social issues that can cause and aggravate feelings and experiences of brokenheartedness are where people experience racism against themselves, where people experience sexism, prejudice against people due to having a disability or a difference of some kind, where people are experiencing mental health issues and distress and the stigma that goes with that, where people are experiencing a violent crime against them or their loved ones, where people are experiencing extreme lack of housing security or loss of income, inadequate income, no income, and are deeply threatened in their ability to survive. When people are being treated in any way that they feel is unfair, including at the hands of social workers, where people are witnessing harm to others, harm to nature, for example, when local habitats of koalas and other animals are being destroyed for development and the harm, what's called eco-anxiety, that can cause the impact of mining on landscapes and animals and people who care about the landscapes and animals, issues such as war and genocide and incarceration, seclusion and restraint as part of medical mental health care. Like the list is so long that it is something that I could go on and on about, but you get the idea. Any type of discrimination and stigma is a source of unfairness toward a person or a social group. And it is a type of violence, as far as I'm concerned, and any kind of harm in terms of violence, direct or indirect, is also very serious social issue. And of course, at the top of the list, often in the media, are issues such as domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood abuse, all sorts of direct violence committed toward people. So the list of issues are enormous. As I was saying, there can be intersecting experiences for some people who can be experiencing many of these things. And what I want to do now is, after painting some of the social dimensions of what could cause brokenheartedness, is now speak to what brokenheartedness can look like for the person. This is again a list of sorts, but it's not meant to be prescriptive, and it's not meant to be definitive and the final comment. So signs of brokenheartedness are literally physical issues with the heart, not to forget those. Also, deep feelings of despair and distress that won't go away, that make it really hard to even breathe and function. It can be named in medical terms as depression, but I don't always find that language adequate for the depths of despair and distress a person can be feeling. It can look like a loss of hope for the world, a loss of hope for oneself or the people around you. It can look like extreme grief where you can't function because you're crying so much, or you just become unable to get out of bed, or you lose interest in a profound way around anything to do with what your life and what normally you'd be able to function and do. And it can look like a level of disengagement and disinterest and uh, an inability to just find a way forward. So when we keep talking like this, you can see very soon we get to the really concerning, deeply distressing experiences that many people have of not wanting to live any longer. This would be an extreme expression of brokenheartedness. What I want to say in relation to that is it always matters. It is never about people just attention seeking when people feel no longer able to keep living. And for now, what I want to say is to not take away from that at all, that people can be incredibly remarkable when they have no sense of will to live because they're so brokenhearted that they will keep living and they will keep finding ways to make a contribution. But it comes as a major struggle day by day to do what they need to do to just function at some level and to make some level of contribution. So brokenheartedness, people can die from brokenheartedness. This is why it's a very big issue for social work. People can live really compromised lives, unfulfilling lives, very deeply challenging lives because they're brokenhearted. And the key point in all of this is that often the causes of brokenheartedness are not directly in the control or caused by the person and their actions themselves. This is why I started by talking about the social issues that are bigger than an individual person. For example, someone being unemployed at this time and without skills that fit what jobs might be around, it is hard to understand that by only looking at and thinking about the person and what they're doing and not doing. There are many reasons for issues of unemployment or mismatch between where people are and the jobs available. Unfortunately, the stigma and bias against people who are unemployed can be deeply troubling and heartbreaking, in addition to not actually being able to get a job and survive and pay your bills and care for the people you love, including yourself. So social issues are the context in which we want to understand brokenheartedness, not to take responsibility off the individual who is brokenhearted, but to place it in its context and then to look with the person at what they can be responsible for to heal and care for their broken heart. So, as I said, lists can be really, really unhelpful because they can miss important elements. And I really get that. But just to remember that the point is to take a wide view of what's happening for the person, not a narrow view. And that's one of the problems often with a medical approach, with just focusing on the physical aspects of what's happening to the heart for the person. It does need its own attention, of course, but we need to understand what's going on in the person's life and the broader society and community in which they live to understand the full dimensions of what's causing the brokenheartedness. It's then not surprising that the ways forward and the solutions are quite diverse and yet in some ways very straightforward, because for the moment with the person you're engaged with and interacting with, it always matters how you treat them and showing loving regard and a sense of proper understanding of the depths of their despair and distress, not taking away from it, in fact, validating and affirming the person's experience is the most important, is always the most important thing to do. As part of that, the other key thing is to respectfully explore with the person, without taking away in any way from their experience, what they think and what you think are all the intersecting other factors, the social factors, the political, economic factors that may be making it really hard for them at this time and aggravating their experiences, and they're contributing to their brokenheartedness. So this is the social work, and the concept of brokenheartedness can really help us tease that out and work with people around that. And it is important to be careful not to assume you know better. Never assume you know better than the person. And in fact, if you listen deeply and carefully to their story, they will already be telling you very much their point of view about the other factors beyond their control that are contributing to their sense of what they may well be calling brokenheartedness. Now, just one example to show what I mean about the connection between the personal experience and language that people might be using in their story, and how you're trying to understand what the nature and causes of the brokenheartedness might be for this person. There's a person, George Bender, who in 2015 came to the attention of the media in a very disturbing, distressing way. George Bender, at the time in 2015, was a farmer in Chinchilla in Queensland, and he died from suicide. And the reason that came to the media's attention is because his family were outraged, as they surely would be, not only because he had died and how he had died, but because of why he died by suicide. And what they were saying very clearly, and in their own words, is that their loved one, George, had died from a broken heart. What was happening was that they were under extreme pressure from a coal seam gas company to allow drilling on his farm. And he, after a long period of time, became so disheartened and so distraught and exhausted with the struggle of trying to stop them from coming onto his farm and drilling, that he gave up and died by suicide. So the fact that the family themselves understood deeply that George had a broken heart is significant for what I'm trying to say here. We need, as social workers, to listen to what the people we're working with say to us. They are right. They are correct. They absolutely understood the external, broader causes of the pressure that George was under that led to his death from suicide. Now, there are other factors around that, and if you work in farming communities, you will be much more attuned to the broader factors and the complex challenges for especially small size farming businesses at this time, and those other factors such as productivity and viability, financial viability of the farm, are really big issues. And the incidence of suicide in the farming community is a really serious social issue. And so George's story sits within those broader complex factors, and it's really important as social workers that we understand that. So George Bender's story is a really good example of how the personal, physical, emotional experience and story of George's life says something very profound about what's not okay in our society and how people can get hurt. And for me, it was an injustice to put that kind of pressure on a person, and also to leave farmers with so few options as to how to have viable incomes without destroying their own landscapes that they love and care for so much. So this is a social issue. It's an issue of public concern, and this is an individual story of brokenheartedness within that. This matters to us as social workers. So the implications for practice for social work, keeping George Bender's story in mind, but also any other experiences that we might be directly involved with in listening to people's stories where we work as social workers. The implications might not sound like they're super radical, but they remain evergreen important in social work. We need to deeply listen to people's stories. We need to deeply appreciate when they are saying they have a broken heart, or when they are saying they have experiences and feelings and thoughts that are almost impossible to bear. We have to know it's having an impact in their bodies, and we have to know that the person is speaking a truth for them, whether we agree with it or not. We also need to be really skilled at supporting and affirming their understandings of what is happening to them, and at weaving in around their story what we understand and know that could be factors that maybe they're not even thinking about, that could be affecting their well-being and particularly the health of their heart. So this doesn't sound like rocket science, but I think the most important gift of a willingness to think of our practice as responding to brokenheartedness is that sensitizing us to listening to people's stories in a more nuanced way, not just for what we can get out of it to do a risk assessment or whatever it is that our job requires, but what is the deep-hearted experience of this person. What does it mean for them? And can you be present? Can you actually be present for that person in the deepest and most hurt and betrayed and unjust experiences that they've relayed to you? So that ability to be with the people, to really hear the full breadth of the brokenheartedness, is what I consider to be the least we should be doing with the people we're working with. So that's me on brokenheartedness, and why I think it's important for social work, and the importance of linking the personal experience of devastation and distress and betrayal and unjust treatment to the social, political, and economic factors that are not separate, that come into a person's life in all sorts of ways, but sit in their heart and can cause devastating pain that is hard to come back from. In another video, I'll talk with you some more about some solutions. But for now, I hope that this has been of some interest to you. Thank you. Bye.